Welcome to today's Making News, when we're going to be discussing industrial energy costs. We'll be talking about why energy costs are so high, what companies can do to reduce those costs, and the practical steps they can do to reduce their energy bills. I'm joined today by Dan Turvey from Inspired and Patrick Matthewson from Make UK, who are going to talk all about the realities on the ground and who are going to give you some top tips on how you can reduce your energy bills. So, Patrick, we often hear, and in fact at Make UK we use the stats that the UK has some of the highest industrial energy costs in the advanced economy. So we hear that it's 4 times more than the US, double the amount of the EU. Can you tell us why that is the case?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and as you say, it's something we mention a lot, and it's very important to many of our members. So essentially, the UK market is dictated by a few things. Firstly, we have a marginal pricing system, which means that often the highest cost generation sets the price. So it means that consistently, say, a gas plant in the current crisis might be setting the price, and that means electricity users are paying a higher price than perhaps the actual kind of cost of that energy is. Secondly, the UK is set up in quite a weird way, in the way that a lot of the sort of policy costs which contribute to some of our climate measures, so thinking about the renewables obligation, thinking about CFDs, thinking about the capacity market, are levelled onto electricity bills. And it means that there's an artificial rising of the electricity bill price, which goes against some of the principles that are used in different countries, and it means that, you know, consistently we have very high electricity bills. And thirdly, we have a really ageing and out of date infrastructure system, which means that energy doesn't move around the system as quickly and efficiently as possible. So it means that there's constraint costs added onto bills, and there's infrastructure bills that are added onto bills, which leaves us in a very, very difficult place where energy bills are particularly high compared to the European market.
So we have costs on top of costs and then bills on top of bills.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like it's pretty complicated actually to kind of get into detail on why those energy costs are so high. But of course we are hearing that they're really high now, and particularly because of the conflict in the Middle East. So Dan, would you say that we are in an energy crisis right now, and maybe do some comparisons to the kind of 2022 crisis? And while I appreciate you don't have a crystal ball, would you be able to give us any kind of prediction on how long you think this is going to last?
Yeah, so starting with the second point, how long may this last? The feel from the market and the response from price has generally been that this will take sort of 6-12 months to resolve. A really good sort of clue and indicator to this effect is looking at the forward year markets. So the 2026 market's been the really upward, erratic, volatile, strengthening market throughout this. Whereas if you look at the 2028 market, that's been relatively flat. You've seen like increases of 5, 10, 15% max. So the assessment from the market isn't that this is a multi-year thing. And leading back to the point around the comparison to the previous energy crisis, back then the third year market went up 750% in the extreme. So a much bigger response from market back then. I think we've got to be expectant of continued volatility. Unfortunately, that is just the flavour of this decade. In the first few months of this decade, we did the lowest ever energy prices, and then about a third of the way through, we did the highest ever energy prices, and we're just sort of normalising that effectively, and we're getting used to conflict, we're getting used to disruption, and we're seeing these really sort of erratic price responses as a result. I think what's been slightly frustrating from the energy purchasing perspective over the last month, 6 weeks, has been the lack of sort of clarity around the message of where the market is specifically from a gas and power perspective, and how it's often bundled in under the umbrella of fuels with oil, and therefore the sort of assumption from energy buyers typically is that we are in something that resembles the energy crisis type levels. If you think the heights of where we've got to over the last 6 weeks, 2 months, is the sort of 150, 160 pence per therm area on gas. Back in the energy crisis, we did 800, 900 as a regular occurrence. It was far, far higher. But with oil, the difficulty we have, because as we say, we're familiar with petrol prices and diesel prices, oil prices actually are at their comparable levels to 2022. And that's where it's difficult to unpick it from the media perspective and the detail of gas and power. Not to kind of underplay the seriousness of this and the potential for it to deepen and widen and broaden and potentially escalate prices further, but it's in no way comparable from a price strength and depth perspective right now.
And I guess from a manufacturer's perspective, unless they have all that detailed knowledge that you and Patrick have, actually they're just going to have that sense of nervousness of, oh my gosh, we could be back in 2022. So what can I do to help myself? What can I do to protect myself from those kind of volatile prices? So I guess, leaning into that, the question I guess to both of you is there anything, manufacturers can be doing to help themselves, particularly thinking about those who perhaps are about to renew their contract, because again there's lots of nervousness that we hear there, and is there any support, again Patrick, focus really on you here, that government has, right now, what is available? But I appreciate also that's a huge question because there is almost a myriad of support, and actually understanding what's available is one of the biggest challenges. So Dan, maybe, what could a company do if they are about to renew their contract and they're sort of nervous about, what their bill might be in the future?
Well, rhythm and routine and proactiveness are critical, because we don't just want a low price for this year. We want a consistent, smooth, understandable price, ideally as low as possible, but we want continuity of price. We want that clarity of what the bill's going to be next year and the year after. So tips, I think, to sort of remedy that and go about ensuring that you're not being dragged around by this market, being responsive to sort of media headlines. Firstly, from the energy buying standpoint, if you can convert from a fixed contract to a flex contract, that does a lot of the heavy lifting, because a fixed contract is just pinpointing an area of time for your price to set for the next 12, 24, 36 months. And you can't really know until retrospect whether that was a good, bad or indifferent decision. And there's a lot, again, differently to the previous decade. You go back to 2015, 17, 19, it doesn't matter when you buy your energy contract because it's about a 20% shift across multiple years. This is 200% per year quite often. So it matters hugely as to the timing of it. So like I say, the way to sort of circumnavigate that key decision is to look at flex contracting, which in their simplest form are dividing up your purchasing into chunks kind of rhythmically across time. And the outcome is just a smooth representative version of what played out. You'll just get a normal price. It won't be fantastic, but you absolutely haven't therefore bought in the top half of the market, because that is the danger right now. People receive their alarm bell, if you like, from the news and they think, well, we need to do something. We can't let this go higher. And what you tend to do therefore, and you see it as a behavioural thing from buyers, is you end up with price in the top 80, 90% that are available. So buying flexibly will really help you, and it's quite good as well with uncertainty around usage, because you can sort of reforecast and reprofile, etc. The other thing that you can look at around flex, and this is really not unique to manufacturers but across the board, and obviously we have access to all of the buying practice across all sort of businesses, companies, backgrounds, private, public sector. And when you look at all the purchasing detail, all of the buying price information and contract outcomes, there's one key variable in amongst there which yields lower prices, and that is length of contract, but not just length of contract, being proactive within that length of contract. So if you take all of the tradable data that we have, if you increase length of contract, you decrease price as the outcome. There's like an inverse correlation. And if you reduce your length of contract, then you increase your price. That's the clear thing that you can draw from all of the information we have. It's not a clever strategy, it's not buying, selling, it's not day ahead market. It's being proactive and deliberate and opportunistic within a sort of forward thinking framework, and actually occupying areas of the market which are both consistently lower priced and lower price movement. So, I mean, that's arguably more crucial than lower price. The actual price doesn't change that much. And if you can, and I appreciate from the sort of manufacturer standpoint, it's difficult to push your purchasing focus multiple years ahead because there's that uncertainty around usage, what we'll be consuming, what's the economic landscape going to be like. But if you have got that core sort of 30, 40, 50, 60% of usage, which is relatively static, then the best way to go about purchasing that is in a slightly further out market, further down the line. And if you can sort of tick all those boxes, your wholesale price outcome should be low, smooth, consistent, understandable, and you're not making these huge calls in a market that makes no sense, because we're watching these news events and we're not completely understanding of what's going to come next. You know, that's the situation we're in. So that would be my recommendation around sort of flexible contracting.
And I think that's a great top tip for us to take away anyway, because I think, Patrick, a lot of the work and research we do actually, manufacturers tend to fix, and they tend to have short contracts, because that's their way of sort of dealing with uncertainty, to actually take kind of a short-term view. I mean, the other part, of course, Patrick, in terms of uncertainty is, you know, what's available to me today. And I know, again, you know, it's quite complicated, and it depends on what sort of manufacturer you are, what sector you're in, but give us a bit of an idea of the sort of support schemes that are available to manufacturers right now.
Yeah, so government has essentially got two main support schemes for manufacturers. So the first would be the sort of EII scheme, which used to be the British Industrial Supercharger.
And EII?
EII, sorry, energy intensive industries. So that would be, you know, sort of steel, those sort of sectors that are quite heavy industries. So they have a support scheme which essentially removes part of those policy costs that we discussed earlier from their bills, alongside a network uplift, and it supports them to reduce that cost and give them a more, I guess, pure idea of what the wholesale price for electricity is at the moment, and it makes them much more competitive against European competitors who don't have those policy costs on their bills. Similarly, government has proposed the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme, which is a bit of a mouthful, and that's still in kind of the process of being developed at the moment, so we've just had the consultation response to that. And that's looking to do a very similar thing, but to the section of businesses that are not quite in that energy intensive industries group, but in that lower group, which is majority of our members. So as it's been proposed at the moment, that's covering around 11,000 businesses, and those are focused on those businesses that are in the IS8 or the industrial strategy kind of frontier sectors. But there's also some foundational industries below that they're aiming to cover in this scheme. And it's all reliant on your SIT code and your HS code, so what you're producing and what you're categorised as in terms of your industry. That scheme, only covering 11,000 businesses, is quite concerning because there are obviously many more manufacturers that won't be covered by that support and are therefore paying the high premium that everyone else is paying and not getting that necessary support to use that sort of that high level of energy that many manufacturers do require, even if their SIT code doesn't necessarily match up to what's been defined by that scheme. So here at Make, we've been very much campaigning to get that extended to the majority of our members, and we'd like to see that extended to ideally 130,000 manufacturers, but would very much take the kind of broader definition of advanced manufacturing to around 50,000 manufacturers. And that's really a easy response to the current crisis, and taking into appreciation that there is some idea that prices will rise slightly, even though not to the levels of the last crisis, but there is still that kind of unease in the market, and any support will be well received at the moment. Previously, when there was the last crisis, there was the energy bill discount scheme and the energy, oh God, I've lost it, sorry.
Bill relief scheme?
Yeah, it's energy bill relief scheme, yeah. Which set a price for energy for non-domestic sector, and they had some certainty that they can move forward to. And I think that's what we find with a lot of these support schemes, is that manufacturers are just calling out for certainty. They want to know what they're going to be paying so they can move forward, know what output they can produce, and know what price they'll be coming out with at the end of that, and know what their order book will look like at the end of that. So I think that's the most important thing that government can do at the moment. Government further have also been looking at ways to separate this relationship between gas and electricity prices. There is a proposal that came out on Tuesday which is exploring that. That's obviously a much longer term solution, and myself and others will need to do a little bit more analysis on what that's actually looking into. But those sort of proposals are showing that there is a understanding from government that there's a kind of wider structural problem with how the market's designed, and seems to be a bit more of an acknowledgement that actually things aren't working how they should be, electricity users particularly are getting punished for doing the right thing in terms of sort of meeting net zero obligations. Aside from that, they've also been looking into reforming national pricing and finding a new way to kind of get the functionality of the market working. So that's looking at really restructuring those market arrangements again to make them work for a system that's renewables led and a system that means that you're getting a fairer sense of the electricity price and not against the gas price.
Okay, great. And I guess there is things that companies can do to just become more energy efficient, right? So if you can't rely on government policy or support schemes, actually you want to bring it in-house and you think, how am I going to be more energy efficient? And that's where you can do things like look at kind of business rates relief and other areas of support. So I think it's always worth, even though you might not fall into that kind of camp of I'm definitely going to get a 25% reduction in my energy costs. Actually, if I look at how I can help myself, there might be some more availability there. I mean, we've talked about kind of volatility and uncertainty, and everyone says the only certainty is uncertainty. So, is there anything that can be done to stop us being in this situation again? Because we had 2022. Okay, yep, we're not quite where we were there, but there is that worry that energy costs are peaking, whether it's kind of media driven or companies are feeling it on the ground. How do we stop it happening again? Is that possible?
So from my point of view, I think a renewables-led system is the best way to do that. And that means a renewables-led system which is sort of sovereign to the UK. So we're not reliant on these outside influences. We're not reliant on a increasingly uncertain geopolitical situation. The reason why the 2022 crisis was so bad is because we were heavily reliant on gas imports from Russia. Again, this current crisis, if say liquefied national gas facilities were destroyed in Qatar, that could have really bad impacts on the supply chain further down, because we are still quite reliant on those imports, and the EU in total is quite reliant on those imports. So making sure that we've got homegrown electricity and energy facilities is a really important step to protect against these sort of fossil fuel related shocks. The other steps that manufacturers might be able to take that's more within their own gift is investing in sort of on-site renewable technologies. So, putting solar panels up on their roofs and then also installing some battery storage. So they've kind of got this excess power if it's a really sunny day, and then they can use that when the weather conditions might not work in their favour. They could also use those storage facilities to sell that energy back into the grid and actually make that sort of storage profitable as well, alongside being able to power their own operations. But ultimately, I think the UK needs that system change, which they have been planning for quite a long time, to sort of hit that renewables-led power system and hopefully start moving away from those volatile sources of energy as we've seen in the last two crises.
I think until then, we've got to treat purchasing energy differently to the way that we did historically. And like we've alluded to in detail, the 2022-23 crisis wasn't an isolated incident. That is just how things have operated throughout this decade. And I think where we've talked about some of the drive and the uncertainty and the geopolitics, we can't expect that to change over the rest of this decade. The sort of key contributors to the uncertainty, the likes of Trump, Netanyahu, Putin, they're still going to be operating and dictating play for a number of years. So, again, when does this sort of conclude and how does it resolve? That's one thing, but I don't think that we can be kind of complacent, expecting the market to move back down to sort of more manageable levels. Yeah. We need to adjust our buying approach to this market, unfortunately. I mean, there's some fantastic volatility indicators for the first 4 months of this year. We are 700% up and 900% up on two of the key volatility indicators compared to pre-energy crisis levels. So that's daily price movement and quarterly price movement. This market is just in no way, shape or form comparable to how businesses might have kind of worked their way through it historically. So unfortunately, as you say, until there's those sea changes, the material structural changes around where pricing sits, and there's hopefully more sort of synchronicity around renewables rather than gas and the more troubled sort of fuel setting the price tone, then we've just got to be on top of it and accessing information at all times and making sure that it's fit for purpose.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure if I feel like more nervous or more at ease, but I'm going to go for more at ease because actually, there are clearly things that manufacturers can be doing for themselves. And I think, Dan, you've given us some great examples of those that companies can take away, particularly in terms of how they are buying their energy. And I think there is a big kind of piece on education and awareness of what can really kind of help you there. And Patrick, completely agree. We have made a good start on things like the BICs, as we now know and love it, but actually there's still great potential to help more firms, and it's not even just about the kind of here and now, it's about how we are more kind of internationally competitive and really think about our long-term resilience. And I think that's your point, Dan, that there is lots of things that we can't control, but we actually then kind of need to take control ourselves. So thank you both. I think fantastic insight on all things industrial energy costs. Hopefully some really great takeaways for manufacturers to be thinking about how they're buying their energy, what they can do to get their energy bills down, and knowing that Patrick and Make UK continue to lead the charge on making sure that government support is really helping manufacturers to thrive.